Bonjour!
Hi everyone!
Welcome to episode number 9 of Mom Talks with a French accent.
Yeah.
I'm Cecile from La Petite Creme.
And I'm Fanny.
And we're happy to have you today. Hi everyone!
Hi.
Welcome! We are going to wait a little bit for our co-host to join. Here we go. Hello.
Hi.
So happy to see all the familiar faces here.
Yeah, she is.
Hi. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Welcome.
How's everyone?
Episode number 9.
Yeah.
We are getting closer to our 10th anniversary already of
Oh
those
my
episodes.
gosh. Wow. That's amazing. Wow. How old were your kids when you started?
When we started our business, my boy was 9 months old
Oh,
and my daughter was 2.
I didn't have kids at that time.
Fanny was on the other side of
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
the parenting journey.
Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. Wow,
Yeah.
time flies, right?
It does. It
But
does.
La Petite Creme was my first baby.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that's sentimental, yeah.
It is.
Yes, it's quite a bit of adulting, right?
Yeah.
Kind of walking into that space.
It has its similarities, like being an entrepreneur and being a parent.
Yeah.
A lot of the things are
Similar.
in many ways.
What similarities have you found?
Well, the dedication that it needs, the work that's needed.
That it's never stop. Like when you close the office, you still have the company on your shoulder even if you're home. So that's the same with kids.
Yeah.
Keeps you up at night, and
sometimes
it finds the way to always pull you back in, even though you thought you could have some free time. You know, all those aspects, and also the reward of it,
yes.
right? The joy of it.
And create some memories also.
Yes.
So yeah, there is good and bad sides of like everything in life. It's the same for everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that the evolution, like over like the differences between like what you thought was going to happen and what did happen, right?
Yeah,
and kind of
very
like
much.
realizing that journey is already there. You just have to follow it and be at peace with it.
And very much like a kid, it's at first you hold it in your hand, and then eventually it becomes its own entity that wants to gravitate and live on its own, and you end up being like holding it, bringing it somewhere, but not so much of you driving, right? So it is very similar.
Yes.
Hi everyone joining. Hello. So let's
Bring up the topic.
yeah. So today we're talking about discipline.
Yes.
Ooh, what we love to go for those topics that are like just a little bit of that, but we don't shy away from anything in this talk. So we're going for that one.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce myself real quick. I'm Dr. Perlman, pediatrician in Miami and New York, and I currently work as a holistic health coach. So that's my kind of credentials, and I have 2 college-age kids. I consider that part of my resume.
It is. It is.
That's part of my resume. So I mean, between you guys, let's just use the word. So like discipline. When I say that word, what comes to mind? Just curious.
Yeah. Go first.
So discipline for me, it's a way to try to get your kids on the right path. For me, I would say with my own word, that will be that. So behind discipline, you can put whatever you want. It can be like putting them like away, talking to them, like different kind of discipline that you want to have with your kids. So,
right.
And I think each parent may use different technique because of their kids, because of who they are. So yeah, for me, it's to try to drive them in the right path, like the right path for you, because
Right.
everyone has a different rule at home, but obviously you want your kids to follow your rules that you think are important to have for home and in the society in general. So for me, I would say that.
Yes. What about for you?
To me, I would say it's boundaries. Boundaries for them, boundaries for me, boundaries for us to interact with one another. So when they're crossing my line, when I'm crossing their line, which is usually where the need for intervention gets in, right? Like yeah, to me, it's usually negative. I don't know if we have a way to explore a point where it can
Maybe
be
it
positive.
Yeah, it's a negative.
Right.
But to me, it's a negative word. Like discipline is something where it's repressive, right? It's not preventative. Now that you
Yeah.
talk about it,
Oh,
so.
Maybe it can be, but we don't know.
We're only parents. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like sometimes words and like kind of concepts, they vary, sometimes even based on like where you are in your life and where your kids are in their life, right? So gazing at a toddler, you see things that are very concrete, right? You're like, this is a road. You don't run into the road, right? You
Yeah.
must have the discipline. I'm going to, you can either use it as like a active form. I'm going to discipline you, right? Or do you have discipline, like as a noun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of times when you're talking about like the kind of younger age, right, you're talking more about physically what to do, like physically. So it's that kind of thing where I remember I would always joke that crossing the street with my kid was so exhausting, right? Because if there was like a crossing guard, I would be like, look up, look at the crossing guard, make eye contact with the crossing guard, say hello and good morning to the crossing guard, say goodbye to the crossing guard, and then look, make sure that there are no cars across the street. Like by the time we crossed the street, I was like, oh, that was exhausting. Like what right? Why was that? But I almost felt like I really wanted to get them into for me, getting into the discipline of like properly greeting people, saying please and thank you were skills at that moment that was relevant. And I feel like as kids get older, right? It's interesting because now I see the world a little bit differently because now I have two kids who don't live with me anymore, right? So they're in college. And the discipline part becomes a little bit less active. And you probably see it in your pre-adolescence, right? We start talking about discipline as a noun, right? Do you have discipline? Do you have the discipline to do your homework, right? Do you have the discipline to like, have a regular schedule, to wake up on the right time, right? So it becomes a situation where it's not really us telling them to do things, but we're starting to kind of hope that whatever lessons we have presented infuse in them, because the ultimate goal, right, is that when they're out of your coop, they're out of your house, that they hear almost like your voice or like an inner monologue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's self-discipline,
Right?
right? From like disciplinary to like self-construed thoughts.
Yeah,
Right.
very important.
And I think that it's interesting because there are a couple things, and I completely get like from where, but it's hard because I feel like it's interesting when your kids are younger, things are actually so much clearer. They always say like bigger people, bigger problems, right? And like once you've passed adolescence, and I feel like when they're younger, it's actually very clear. It's like don't touch the knife, right? Like when you walk, it's just when you say act the right way, I'm like I'm with you. Yeah, there is a right and wrong. That's very clear. It's black and white. But I have to tell you, 9 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, 15, all of a sudden the right and wrong gets a little fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
Right? And you start to understand that like right and wrong is probably not going to survive those years. Like that's the idea of like what would be a successful, disciplining practice for that age then becomes more about them, right? In the beginning, it's about you figuring that out. As they get older, they have to kind of figure that out. You know? Because if they don't figure that out and don't have that inner monologue, they're going to have a hard time when, you know, you're physically not with them.
Yeah.
You know?
But you hope that at the young age you put like the right seed for them to remember like the limit and like what is mostly wrong and good. So you really hope that you did a good job like this past year, because I think that's what they get for reference, like when they were young. And I think the limit when they were young, as you say, it's yes or no, it's dangerous or it's not dangerous. But when they grow up, they have to transfer this limit in their world. So they have to remember it. So
and that's the problem. Sometimes, you know, like you said, like they're going to take what you learned, but there's going to be a moment where every situation is actually much more complex.
Yeah.
And now they're like, wow, you know, when I was younger, everything was clear, right? Like I understood that right and wrong. Now I'm not really, I feel like I can't use that I can't use that like formation. Like I have to use a little bit of judgment, right? This is where things become different. I think this is where I think things start to become a little bit more culturally dependent. Okay. Sometimes I feel like it's interesting. I'm not going to necessarily like say Western, Eastern. I'm always blown away. I still haven't quite made it through it all. But you know, all these like the Japanese kids on the subway at like 3 years old, right? And like, you know, this whole concept of like trying to give tasks to kids at a very young age so they kind of develop that confidence, because it is connected. And you know, one thing that you had said, Cecile, is that you kind of were upset that you're like, the word discipline is kind of a negative term. You know, like we say it kind of like you've been bad. You know, like it is, because we have a little trouble transitioning to like the concept that like our kids have to learn how to self-discipline. It's a little scary. Like, you know, you're almost there. Your daughter is how old now?
She's on 11, so yeah.
You're in that transition zone. Like you can see it. It's right there, right? Every now and then it comes out and it's like, no, I don't think that's wrong. Why can't I do that? Right? Like, right? So they're already kind of trying to knock down those walls and say, hey, there isn't any right path. I got to figure this out on my own.
But they also do that like in the 2-3 years old. Still. Like they're also getting to that path of like, I can do it. Fanny's right into it. She knows.
Right? And I do think that it's funny because you have to give them credit. At that age, they have, I agree with you, the conviction is there, right? The conviction's like, no, I believe that I have a right to do this. I mean, they double down at that age. You know, like 2, 3, I'm like, you know, I would almost take a 15-year-old before a 2-year-old. You know what I mean? Like they're like all in, right? But I think that in some ways, as a parent, the things that they kind of argue about, you're like, okay, no, this is actually very clear to me. Whereas, as they even start to inch that 9, you know, sometimes they'll make a decent point where they're like, well, why can't I do that? And you're like, that's a good point. Like, maybe I should let you do that. Like, you know, I don't know. Maybe they start to get kind of convincing. And that's where this idea of like, how do you transition? I'm going to discipline you to like, I am now developing my self-discipline. How do you transition that so that it is actually a positive thing? Discipline can be an incredible thing. Like, you know, to be able to say like, these are things that make me feel safe, that I know certain boundaries, that these are things that kind of make me understand the world better, is actually great. It's a great, remember we talked about the boat, right? It's them making that boat stronger, you know?
So the discipline is also, can we agree that it's not only coming from the parents, right? The world is also going to do some part of the discipline, because when they say, I want to do, I don't know, I want to walk outside without my coat on, then they get a cold. Yes. And that's the universe telling them, hey, wasn't the brightest things to do. So,
and I mean, and to this day, my husband will still not wear a hat outside because his mother told him to wear a hat when he was like 4. So like, I can't tell you that we all mature necessarily to be like, you know what, maybe she was trying to keep me from getting a cold. He'll still argue like, it doesn't make a difference, you know, like wear a hat or not. So I mean, sometimes we are still pretty adamant. We still are doubling down. I think what you're talking about, and I tell people this a lot of times, if they have a kind of like, I don't want to say permissive parenting where they're like just kind of not really giving those boundaries, is that it's either going to be you or their boss. Somebody's going to put that line. And there's something in the concept of frustration tolerance.
Okay, so why is that? Tell us more about that.
The frustration tolerance is something that you kind of want to gradually build in your kids and also yourself. And I'm not saying while on one hand, I'm saying trying to empower toddlers whenever you can. If they want to wear, you know, the red shirt with the orange pants and they look kind of crazy, let them, right? This is not a situation where, right, give them that confidence, right? But they've got to hear, no, you can't do that, right? If there's a situation that actually isn't really in their best interest, you have to say no. And when they say, I want to do it, they are just trying. I mean, it's their job to try to see how firm you are. But if they get to a space where they're like, I can't take it. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. And they can't develop that skill to be like, you know what, in this scenario, at this moment, I don't really 100% want to put my jacket on, but, you know, I'm going to get past this, right? I'm going to get on with my day. I'm building my frustration tolerance because, frankly, the world, there's a lot of no's. And sometimes the no's are not right. So I'm not saying that every no is right, right? But I think that, you know, if you can't hear no, and you only hear like, oh, well, whatever you want to do, it becomes a situation where it's a lot harder to hear it later on.
Okay.
And at some point, society will give them a no. Anyway, as you say, like the boss or even like the police, like you don't do whatever you want in life.
Yeah. It's kind of a controversial thing I'm going to say, because a lot of times I feel like, especially this generation of parents, you know, there's a lot of like, okay, let me see what teacher they're getting. I want to make sure that they're in this class. There's a lot of that handling. My parents like barely even knew where I was like half the day. They kind of like dropped me off to school. They had no idea. Like they didn't get involved. If I didn't like the teacher, they were like, too bad. Like, you know, like whatever, you know. And I know that, you know, I understand that temptation. I understand that desire. However, and I'm not saying every teacher is perfect. So, you know, I'm not putting that carte blanche. But frankly, how many of us love our bosses? I mean, like, you have to learn how to work.
We do.
Besides you guys. But, you know, it's that kind of thing where the truth is that, you know, life gets complicated. So it is a skill set, you know, but there has to be a transition from where like let's do this. Don't act like that because I'm going to be mad, right? As the parent, to like, you know, I don't want to really do that because that's actually not a good idea for me to do. You see? So one word goes from, right, I'm getting disciplined to like, I personally agree. Like I don't want to do that myself. Yeah. That is like, this is like the main reason you are a parent is to like build. Those are the shingles on that boat. Those are the pieces of wood that you're putting together.
And sometimes you have to let them understand the no by themselves because, for example, my daughter, she cannot have too much dairy. Okay. And at school, they will serve her whatever she wants. Yes. And I explain her many times, like, Zoe, it's not quite good for you, but I have no control there. So I let her do. And after a week, she get like sick about what she had. Yeah. And at the end, she told me, okay, you were right. I'm going to eat my lunchbox now. But she had to learn the hard way. First, it was the hard way and by herself. So now she decided that, okay, I'm good with the school stuff. I'm going to eat what mommy and daddy put in my lunchbox. Yeah. But it's been 3 weeks of explaining
Yeah.
for her to get sick. Now she did the right thing, but
Well,
I'm
like how many of us, like I can't even tell you how many times I'm like, oh, I know that ice cream is going to make my stomach hurt. So sometimes, most of the time, I'm like, okay, not right now. But sometimes I'm like, you know what? I want the ice cream. Like,
yeah.
I think my stomach's going to hurt. I want to be able to make that choice.
Yeah.
And
That's difficult as parents to let them do something that it's wrong, but
right.
what you can do, like you already said million times, you try to explain million times
Yeah.
different ways. So,
but it's so much more powerful that she's like doing it on her own, because already, how old is she now?
I said 5.
5, right? So already at 5, she has a lot of time without you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So honestly, this whole idea that I'm going to literally, I hear sometimes like, don't do that. Mommy's going to be very mad at you. You're going to make mommy very sad. You're going to make mommy very disappointed. You see how it's still keeping all of that. You're trying to make me feel better. First, it's like, yeah, you eat that cheese, you just be congested or like have diarrhea this week,
Yeah. I told her, like, if you eat that, your belly is gonna hurt. Like, it's Zoe, and she's like, me.
Right? But now you can say, like, now already at 5,
Yeah.
she's making a decision,
Yeah.
right? A decision than probably a lot of adults too. Like, because sometimes, it's that kind of thing where, like, that to me, like, one of the things that we dropped in one generation is this idea that, like, food affects how you feel. I don't know
And that's
how this happened.
That's very different from like kids to kids, because I think maybe my daughter need to learn by herself to her own experience, but maybe some kids will have understand like the second time you say it, they will say, okay, I'm gonna listen, mommy. So we have to adapt to each kid, because maybe I just discovered that it is the way that she will function, and for future thing I will have to let go a little bit and let her do her own experience, but it's not easy.
But that's why those first 5 years of life are so important for you to be around, because you get to see a little glimpse of how she is. I guarantee she won't be any different at 15. You'll be having.
Well, it's very scary for me.
And I mean, they don't change. It's the same freaking kid,
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that, like, if you, it's interesting because I like the fact that you put in quotations. It's like the right path is a different path for every kid and every interaction with it. It's a very kind of like, this whole idea that, like, oh, you treat me different than my sibling, right? Like because we're all different. So like, one disciplining modality for one kid will work completely differently on another one. And I guarantee you it'll fail. Like, like, I feel like I never could, like, copy and paste,
Yeah, no.
together. That never worked.
No.
So I feel like, it's, I guess I'm trying to spin this positively. Cecile's basically what, because it's too big, right? I know it feels like, because it goes, it really is this process of you kind of saying, hey, listen, there's this whole, like, kind of bundle of stuff that I generally feel you should or should not do. And then you're literally transferring that decision-making tree to them slowly and fusing it. So that when they're sitting there,
it's also admitting, and I'm kind of talking to myself here, admitting that they start from scratch in their knowledge of the word. And I know for myself, I usually use discipline as a matter of, like, efficiency. Like, I know where it's going. I don't have the time for it.
Right.
I'm just going to push it to you because my time is valuable.
Right.
And which means they never really understand why, except because mommy said so, right? And sorry?
Can you give me an example?
I don't know, like preparing for your homework, right? Like, I'm going to do all my homework, but then I realize that it's not done in the chronological order that the homework is due. So I go behind. I'm like, it doesn't make sense. We're going to be here until like 11 o'clock at night. Let me shuffle everything around. And I mean, good. I'm trying to just be like, it's going to be more efficient if I show you how to do it. But back to Fanny's point, they're not learning anything, right? Because they're just going to do it the way mommy said, because they trust that I know better because I have more experience and I've proven through younger year that usually when I say something, it happened to be correct. But you're right, it's not helping them to think for themselves, right? And have that stick to them besides the fact that, oh, I'm doing that because I remember mommy making a point about it.
Like you really
want
to like internalize
I
it.
don't have time there too.
What is it?
I said like sometimes, yeah, it's very easy because you don't always have time for everything to try to let them learn by themselves. Like it's so many tasks in life that sometimes doing the shortcut
So
is
I'm
necessary.
gonna embarrass my son, who I love dearly, but is in college now. And up until like the day he left my house, like if we were in school the night before, my husband would catch me untying his shoelaces. Because if his shoelaces were tied and he was running late, as he usually is, right? Woke up late, it would be literally like 15 minutes of trying to untie his shoes, which would make us even later, right? So my husband would catch me and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "No, you understand, this is a game changer. Like if the shoelaces are tied, we're screwed. We're going to be totally late. And this is like a 17-year-old person, okay?" And he's like, "He knows how to do it." I go, "Yes, but I know he can do it, and I trust that he can do it. However, it's not efficient. Like
I know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
5-minute window to like get him out of the window." And thankfully, he's in college. So I had no freaking clue. Ideally, I would hope he would do that, right? Like the night before, "Oh, my mom used to untie my shoelaces, maybe," right? He's not doing that, okay? He's not doing that. And whether or not he's late because he's doing his shoelaces, I don't even know. Like, I don't even want to know. Like, so it's that kind of thing where, like, occasionally we almost like create these things that make life more efficient. I think that's really insightful because it's like it's efficient for us, but is it necessarily something that like they will carry on themselves? Maybe, maybe not.
It's efficient short term. It feels efficient because we're in control and we can anticipate what the timeline is going to be. What if in my case, I feel like if I let it go, who knows which turn and twist it's going to make. I mean, we'll get there eventually, but what my state of mind when we get there and the time that we get there and the overall mood can vary from one way to the other. So I'd rather keep control of that. But from what I'm hearing, it's probably not the most beneficial all the time.
Yeah,
and yet, I mean, listen, the kid knows how to tie his shoelaces. It's not like, his time management is crap, but, he knows how to tie. So honestly, like, there does come a point where it's like, whatever, you get what you get. So I guess my point is that don't feel bad about it. Sometimes it's just things that we have to do because we got to friggin' get the day through. And if they want to continue that habit when they're out of our face, they choose that, right? They get to choose.
It also feels, and I'm going to just admit my guilt here. It feels nice to have control over something, and it's easier to control their life than ours because ours have problems that are just not manageable, like short term with something very easy. So tying those shoelaces is a lot easier than having to like plan the next meeting or like think about the next. It's just an easy win, right?
Yes. And I think that I don't think it was even like my parents, again, and I only refer to other generations just because I do think it's stunning to me sometimes how generations change so quickly within one generation. I just don't remember my parents like ever, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I came up with stuff on my own. Like, I don't know. I don't remember them even like going through my stuff, making sure that everything was like, I just kind of did it. Do you know, like
Maybe they did,
right?
and it's just you don't remember because you think it was your process, right?
Like this is the part that gets a little bit fuzzy, right? Is that again, it's again that gray zone, right? Where it's like, did you do it because you yourself understood that was important? Did you do it because you saw someone else do it for you and you're like, oh, that's a good idea? Like, when does that kind of click where you're like, okay, this is something that I think is important and I think I want to continue this habit, you know? I say the word habit and discipline all interchangeably, you know?
Yeah.
These are all decisions. These are all elements of discipline. And I think that this is, you know, we just do so much. Everyone needs to kind of pick their battles and say, okay, this is what is really important for my kids. This is what I want to kind of, these are the things that I know that they might be frustrated with, but I want them to learn, right? So that's definitely a personal choice. There is no, that's why I'm saying when you say like the right way or what you want, it really is a decision between you and the kid.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you shouldn't be necessarily doing, because everyone else says this. I'd make something preposterous where like, if, you know, for me, it was making sure that my kid said please and thank you, right? Some other people like, well, I want to make sure that my kid runs 5 miles a day. That's not one of my priorities, like not for my kid. But some people, it
Who
is.
has time for that? I mean,
That's like beyond laughable. But the point is that like, you know, everyone's definition is kind of different from family to family. But again, the gold standard, the thing that you strive for, is that your children have like a decision-making tree that maybe occasionally refers to you, and sometimes may outright not refer to you. Like, you know, maybe it's like my husband, who was like 50 years old and still refusing to wear a hat. Like, you know, I mean, like he just clearly like was like, no, never, I will never do it. You know, so it's that kind of thing where like it's not a failure if they don't do every single thing that you suggest. That doesn't mean that you didn't do the right thing. That doesn't mean you didn't give them the right path. They have a right to decide somewhere along the way.
They do their own choice.
Right?
So,
it is.
So how about, so sometimes we feel like we still need to get some kind of boundaries, and as you said, like if something is completely off limit, like for safety or for whatever reason, you know, like sometimes we hear, or we can be in situations where we feel like I've tried everything, they just won't listen. Like how do we tackle this? Like I'm sure we all live that as parents. We're like, doesn't get in. Like how I do that in different ways. There are different like approaches out there. You know, I'm sure everybody heard of like positive parenting and all kind of different approaches. Where what's the trick there? Like any word of insight that we can provide on like we've tried everything, I can't get my word across.
Okay, so I think there's 2 elements that bring you above and onto the table. So like for me, when I say above, I mean like go into context, come out of it, right? Is this one issue? How important is this one issue? Is this a battle you want to take, right? You should, and it's not fair unless you want your kids to fight you for the sake of fighting. Don't fight your kids for the sake of fighting, right? They learn by modeling, right? So if they just feel like you're just doing it just to spite them because you got to follow my word, I don't really feel that strongly about it, but I want you to listen to me. Not so fair, right? Not fair, right? And I'm not saying sitting there like, I feel like sometimes we do over explaining, especially when if kids like hit other kids or like, you know, or they like, or hit the parent or do something. There's this whole like, you know, I want you to understand why that's wrong. You know what? They don't need to, that is wrong. The more you understand it, you're trying to almost like justify to them why you think it's wrong. So there's certain things where that line has to be very clear. And sometimes a big discussion is not worth it. But sometimes, you know, you have to kind of pull up and say, okay, how important is this one issue? You know, and also like, and a big thing that I always talk about in a good way is that raising children is like having this like perpetual mirror being brought to your face. If it's really important, why is it so important to you? Is it something that you fought your own parents about, right? Is it like a pet peeve of yours? Is it something that your partner does that really annoys you, right? And you don't really want your kids to do it, right?
Maybe.
Right. Right? But
You know which one.
He's like,
She has one. She has one. I'm not saying, but she has one.
It could be that.
But those are all elements that kind of like give you a little bit, it fleshes out that idea of like exactly what are you trying to discipline? What's your point? If it's something that like it's really not that bad, but it annoys you, because your partner does it, right? Is it really the kid's fault? Like if they're doing it because they are genetically related sometimes, to that partner. So like, it's like, is it really their fault? And is it something that can really be changed, right? And I think that, again, the explanation changes, the bigger or older they are. But if it is something, you'd be surprised, even 9-year-olds, if you kind of came to it. It's funny because sometimes, okay, so this is kind of a weird example, but my son is a little bit more of like a kind of like a giver. And then my older one is more of like a taker sometimes. So what would happen sometimes is that Izzy, like, for example, Andre had like this is an elementary school, had a little bit of a like a bag with all their money from birthdays and stuff like that. Not that much, but and then unbeknownst to us, Izzy was taking a little bit from the bag and buying like all kinds of stuff at the gift shop, apparently a shopper, even at like 3rd grade, So, when we found out about it, we were like, and Andre was like, that's fine. Izzy can have my money. Like literally like didn't really care, and Izzy's like, see, I told you, right? Like, I didn't have to ask, like, felt like victorious. And I said, and I explained to Izzy, this is a situation where I was like, no, right? Now you can just say, no, it's not right. And it's funny because we try to use these terms, right and wrong, but like, it doesn't make any sense to this age, right? It just really, and I don't know why I went through to like explain to an elementary school kid, but I was like, and excuse the cursing, but I was like, clearly, like, you just took this money from him. Do you want Andre to like be married to like a bitch? Like, who like bosses him around and takes money from him all the time? I don't know why I told that to like the guy.
Yeah, sometimes we go there. We just go for it.
And then that came to my head. I was like, basically, I just imagined, and then Izzy was like, oh, that's a good point. Like literally for whatever reason. So it's like, it wasn't like if I would have stopped and said, don't do it. It isn't right. I don't know. I feel like it's like, right, wrong. Like he says yes. Like he doesn't care about the money. I mean, Izzy already had like the logic was already there, as to what. But when I kind of circled around the logic, they were like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Like, I didn't think of that. So you'd be surprised if you just spend like 5 minutes thinking like, why is this point? Tell me to yourself, like, why is this point? So you will see a window as to like how it would make sense to that kid. Sometimes it may not work still, but it's amazing. Sometimes kids just demand to be spoken to like fair and square, and I think that consequences, I think that like, even when you were talking, Fanny, to like your young one and you're like, you eat the dairy, your stomach hurt,
What works for us, for Zoe, because Martin is too small, but when she does something and she doesn't want to stop and we are reaching the point that we cannot get what we want, I always like ask her, do you want me to do it to you? Like if she eats her brother or she speaks like bad and she has an attitude, and I said, do you want me to speak to you like this way, like you are talking to me? Do you think it's like a good thing? Would you be happy if I talk to you that way? She said, first she doesn't answer and said, answer to me, I want to answer. And she said, no. So I said, don't do it if you don't want people to do it to yourself.
Like a
that's kind of, if you involve her, she understands that she doesn't want to be treated like that. So maybe it's more like clear for her what feeling it is. So, no. But that worked for us. To try to involve her in the situation.
And I think that again, I think, like you said, like a lot of these things have to be tailor made, right? For a lot of, but I think using the more concrete your images can be, the more kind of powerful, right? That they will, they're like, oh, okay, I can see that. Like, I can see how that goes, It's just, I think that sometimes I'm always like kind of like a little tepid about making it a whole, because kind of misbehavior can come in many different forms, right? So you kind of have to see, like, if it's a situation where if there's attention seeking, if they're like doing, you have to understand the entire context and not make a blanket like you're misbehaving and that's it, right? Sometimes they're tired and they're misbehaving. It's like where the punishment doesn't make any sense because they're actually like really tired and they're not really even understanding the whole context. Tantrums. A lot of times, we talked about that right? It's that kind of thing. Like sometimes it's like the situation is really hard and you just have to spend one moment to say, how can I help you understand how this is not healthy or this is healthy?
But so the more we talk about all the different topics, and as we said, it's our 9th one today, the more it feels like we're not equipped as parents to necessarily be able to step back and look at those things. I mean, we never got you're a professional, so you got this education to know where to look at, but we're just mere human beings. How do we know what to take into consideration, and how do we find the bandwidth mentally to sit down and look at it as almost like, it's not therapy, but it's like really looking at the problem and like breaking it apart and like, what can we do and where do we talk? And you have to repeat that multiple times because it's not one time that you say that the kids gonna be like, oh yeah, I got it, and then move forward. And the next day they wake up, it's a brand new person. They're like, oh, I'm gonna try that again because it's easy, right? So sometimes it feels a little like hard to climb that mountain because we're also working on us. I feel like as parents, we're also working on our own emotion. The everything that's going on in our own head that we can't put words on. So it's not a burden, but it's a heavy weight to have to carry on our shoulder to be able to identify those things and do it the right way for them, right?
Well, I mean, disciplining is one of those touched topics. We've all been disciplined by someone in our lives, whether it be a caregiver, a teacher, a boss. So we all have baggage. We all have like things that were good, things that were like, that was crap. Like, why did that happen like that? You started the conversation too. You started kind of saying that like this is their first time, that they're still young, that they're trying to figure things out. It's our first time being parents, I mean, literally, like, yeah, fine, I'm a doctor, but honestly, like, I friggin' still feel lost. So it didn't give me that much. So I don't want to make you sense like they gave me this big golden book and they were like, you will know all. Like, no, like there were many times that I was like, yeah, that did not work. And so going back to the initial thing that we started talking about, where your workplace, right? Or your job, your business, like your child, right? How do you learn in business? Because it's going to be the same, is through trial and error. And I know that sounds like trial and error. Like, what do you mean trial and error? Trial and error, because everything is so complex, things are so nuanced that there is no linear road. They were interviewing an Olympic athlete, right? So they're like at the top of their game. And they said, so what's your process? Like, how do you keep improving? And they're like, every day, like, there's a little bit of a tweak, something I did really well that day. And there was something that I totally messed up that day. And I kind of declare it in my head, and then I go to the next day. And I have to tell you, I did that all throughout my training. I did that all throughout my work. And I did all throughout the time when I was a parent. Because honestly, like, there's never a moment where you feel like, oh, I've done it, right? I'm done, right? Like, no, I've achieved it. It's like whenever you feel like that, like, look over your shoulder, buddy. Because, like, just down the street, it's headed to you. So, like, don't get too comfortable, right? But there's also days where, like, you have to admit, like, yeah, that did not go well. Like, I got pulled around in that one. And that's okay. Trial and error, I think where I have a hard time, and I'm not saying that any generation is better than the next, and we have our own challenges and whatnot, but I love my parents, and I don't feel like they ever really spent a moment reflecting on, like, oh, oops, that they ever went on to reflecting about, like, maybe they would reflect like once every 10 years, but I felt like in the moment, they just, it wasn't part of their repertoire to be like, hey, this is not going in the right direction. Like, how can I, like, I don't know. I felt like they were kind of like their path. They they saw the path to be much more linear. And if you're misbehaving, they'd almost just wait for you to come back. But it was almost like you either follow my rule or not. So the moment that you realize that I know everything, you are back in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But if you don't do everything I tell you to do, you are back out. And that's kind of harsh. I mean, just to go back to what we were saying culturally, like I always say that like I didn't question my parents until I was like in college, which was like not so awesome, you know? Because I was really grown by then, you know? And my husband, on the other hand, grew up in a Brooklyn Jewish family, and there was always kind of yelling, but people would get stuff out, like things were out. Whereas Asian families are a little bit more like quiet, but like with my eyes, I will tell you that I'm not happy. It was just like completely the opposite. If you could be any two opposite places, and they with my husband, like I asked him, I said, when did you start to realize that, like maybe you had some say in it, right? Like that your parents maybe didn't know everything. And he was like, I think I was like 3 years old. Like, and I was like, 3 years old? Like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, they did something. I was like, oh, that's messed up. You shouldn't do that, right? And I never, like, it was 25 when I was like, oh, my parents didn't do that great. It wasn't great that they did that. It was too different. It was like the complete opposite. So you do want your kids to kind of question it and make the mistakes and kind of absorb the mistake as soon as you can.
So you're saying that, and that's interesting, because we're sometimes told that the kids shouldn't see any disagreement between the parents. So I feel like we should always have that facade of like everything is wonderful, and social media is not helping in that, where now to the outside world everything is always fantastic. So there is this fear, I feel like, now with parents, that if you screw up once, your entire life of your kid is just like, that's it, you've broken the thing, it's never go back to like normal or to okay. Yeah. So can you reassure us on that if we screw up every other day, we're good?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's like, yeah, I'm at the everyday, so I don't know.
Perfect.
With that, I think that there has been nothing more amazing to me, as I've watched my kids grow older, than to kind of almost to apologize to my kids sometimes. And sometimes I am a mess, and they have to know that, like, I feel like sometimes our parents were messes, and then they would just like take it out on us. I'm distressed because you guys did this to me. There's a lot of that weirdness. When sometimes it's like, yeah, no, I think you're actually like a mess today, and like I've been at home doing my homework. I'm not so sure how I caused this, but it was this whole kind of concept of like subservience, which I don't think really breeds the self-disciplining piece. Doesn't really grow that. And that's a real problem, because life comes fast and hard from very young age, and being able to kind of like get knocked down, get up again, have that resilience. You got to start practicing that dance very early. It's interesting, and maybe tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, I see a lot, like, I always talk about food as a space, or like when you're eating together, when you're spending time together. We have very close French friends, and I remember our kids, and we had toys, but then I think we had pads, because we like to go out to dinner with our kids, but they needed something to look at, and I remember my French friend, his kid was like 3 years old, and he had a little car, one car, not even like a barrage. I had like a basket of things, one car, and he went back and forth with the car. And then the minute the food came, the food came, and the kid kept playing, just whatever. He's a kid, he doesn't care. The food came, and he was like, put that car down, put it. He was like really like very, very like stern, about the fact that the toy and the food should not exist at the same time, right? And I was like, Max, I am so glad I'm not your kid. Like, but think about, like, not that I'm saying that you should have all these, but like, I feel like if you kind of like from a very young age, they have some of these rules. It becomes like second nature. I don't know, for some reason, I spent the weekend in San Diego with some friends, and a lot of them were actually military kids. Like their parents were in the military. And I have to tell you, that's a whole other like kind of beast, right? I mean, it's like, you can really see the difference in like the way they kind of approach the world sometimes. And it's, again, I'm not like the same way that I have like issues with the way my parents, who are kind of like, no, you will have no questions, you will never question. And it's that kind of thing where discipline is like this very, like, I think that we have to be willing to see how it fits, both from our end and from their end, and what optimizes the kid, and what really kind of speaks to them the most. Because only in that way will be the most effective in, again, like having them go back to their mind, go back to their soul, and have them create their own code of discipline, the things that they feel like are the most important, that honestly don't involve you anymore.
So for those who are watching and are either pregnant or with a newborn, when does that start? Like, they're ahead of it, so they can start hoping that they get ahead of the game.
I tell people, I'm like, I've seen a 6-month-old manipulate a whole room of like grown adults. So like, yeah, I'm not going to give you a lot of time. So like, I mean, really just kind of like, I think that a good example sounds awful, but the truth is, I mean, when you're pregnant, you have no control over what's happening. Like, it is like, I remember the midwives would be like, the birth is very similar to their person. Like their birthing personality is the same personality. And I think that it's a very humbling experience to have children, because you realize there's only so much that you can control. And the rest of it just evolves the way it's supposed to evolve. And so your boundaries, again, I always say, we would make these arbitrary things, but I would say, make sure that they say please and thank you and try not to get arrested, right? I say try not to get arrested because my husband, of course, being the lawyer, was like, what if they were in a political protest? At their party? And I was like, okay, forget it. Okay, I will not say that anymore, because clearly, like, you cannot back me up on this one thing I was just going to say, okay? But it's like that bar is really quite, it's like when you're dating and you're like, I want him to have curly hair. I want him to, you have all these like holy, and then at the end you're like, could he just be nice? Like, could he just like, right, just smile more than maybe other people? I don't know, like your bar changes. So, I think that you have to be kind of limber and be like trial and error. Like, and like, this is something that's important to me. This is not important to me. This is important to me because of this. Oh, well, maybe it's not that important. Maybe I shouldn't. You have to kind of put your foot out there and kind of, and create that ship with them, that boat with them. But
so yeah, that two people dance, right? It's not you're seeing discipline as a reciprocal thing and not a one-way street, right?
Yeah. Because everything is digested completely differently, and the logic is completely different. You're different. You're more stressed. You're less stressed. You're in a good place. You're getting triggered because this is something that makes you remember. Then all of a sudden it might trigger you too, because maybe you grew up in a space that was a lot of discipline and you don't want to discipline your kids for that reason. Like, so it's like, we're all human. It's our first time. It's their first time. We're still trying to figure it out. I think that as long as you make the effort and that you're honest with both yourself and your kids, I think there's nothing else that you can expect, right? You're going to mess up and they're going to mess up, and everyone just is going to have to learn to interact with each other. But what a skill that you're teaching, right? What is great skill? Like, you're really teaching them how to exist in society and be someone that, someone enjoys to be around. I said, I just want someone to be able to enjoy. Honestly, you can be the richest person in the world, but if everyone hates you, what's the point? What's the point?
But I mean, to that, I think also, if we get some perspective, even if you don't say hello, please, or thank you, and you're not on the right track, you'll find people to surround yourself, right? Like nobody is left out of society or life altogether because they're not cleaning up their room. Or like you'll find ways. You might not have the most perfect life on paper, but also like the risk is limited to the outcome, right? It's like what? You're just going to be an impolite adult. There are many out there, and
yes,
you define, your happiness in life.
I think the right is kind of a funky one, right? Because honestly, like I had to say, if there's anything, when I look back, like what are ways that, I like discipline, honestly, like, I don't think my kids did a lot of the stuff that I wanted them to, like, or, but it's the kind of thing where I generally think they say please and thank you, but the rest of it, like, it's really not from me. But you're absolutely like you may think like you're an awful person if you don't clean your room, and you're absolutely right. You will find someone who doesn't care that you didn't clean your room.
Yeah.
Like it's not. This is not one to what do they say? Like go on the sword for. Like this is not something that you have to pick your battle.
Yes.
And battles like are slim, but if you can just cultivate in them a sense of boundaries, cultivate a sense of responsibility, both personal and to others.
And a sense of like listening to other people's need too, because the boundaries is also tied to the boundary of somebody else. So let's say they have a roommate tomorrow, or they have a significant other. How do they talk about their boundaries, the other people's boundary? They coexist with others, right? Because it's all about that. It's like it happened to be at home where they hit on my pet peeves, but if they go to somebody else's, they hit on their pet peeves. And if they want to get along with someone, they have to also adapt to other people, right?
Yeah. And that's and also know that if it doesn't work, then that just doesn't work. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person, it just means that you guys are different and that there's different kind of like boundaries that other people have. And be able to like hear that boundary and not be like, oh my God, they must hate me, or like, oh my God, I'm an awful person. Like that's not necessarily true, right? So it's like everything becomes a little bit more gray, a little bit more fluid. But I think that as parents, we have a responsibility to create kind of, self-aware, but also like that they could create boundaries and be like, this is very important to me. We always talk about people, but you also want people that can stand up for themselves and not be bossed around. So again, speaking to that whole thing of like dating a bitch, basically, right? If you boss around your kids so much and never let them have a say, guess what partners they'll choose as friends? Partners
My
that
goodness,
they'll choose.
I just had a vision right now. No!
Partners for life, right? Because they're so used to being like everyone else is telling them to have boundaries. But sometimes, it's actually a very powerful thing when they're like, hey, this actually annoys me when you do that. Can you, like, when they start to kind of say, hey, there's different boundaries here, fair enough, right? Let's coexist. Let's figure out how to do it. That's the dance that gets a little bit more complicated. Starting around 7. I'm going to give you 7 years old. That's where it gets really complicated. I hope that having children is wonderful though. Like it's really wonderful. If you're pregnant or expecting, it's fantastic. It's just, it's a little complicated.
But we'll be here every step of the way. Like we were here today.
Right.
So we'll wrap it for today. I think we brought again another different outlook on discipline. For people who've been watching the previous episode, you know that we usually start with one word and we digress or like end up making the scope even bigger. When we say we're going to have practical tips, it's usually more blurry after. But we hope that whatever you heard today is going to bring some slight change in your life for the positive, and we hope to see you soon in 2 weeks for another episode of Mom's Talk with a French Accent. Bye, Dr. Perlman, and bye everyone. Have a wonderful day.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.